It's amazing how quickly it's recovered. We've seen a huge amount of people come in over the last couple of months, and I almost feel like I want to go back to that pandemic time again, because all of a sudden there's traffic out the front and getting from A to B gets tougher. The surf's getting more crowded. Everything's back to full price again.
Ricky Olarenshaw, welcome to Sports Legends with Bevo, mate. Really good to chat with you, mate, and obviously you're doing excellent things over there in Bali. You've been there for 10 plus years. A mutual friend of ours, Pete Oldfield, Pistol Pete, who does some really good things with the Southern Slugs, who crossed paths with you over there in Asia, involved with footy a couple of years ago. Tell us about Pistol and your involvement there with knowing Pistol.
Oh, mate. Thanks for having me. Yep, here in Bali and enjoying the lifestyle here. Been here for over a decade now, so enjoying the lifestyle. Good to see all the tourists coming back and seeing people starting to make $1 again, so that's great to see. And yeah, in Pistol, we've crossed paths in playing football in Asia. Keen to see him come back with his team, the Slugs, back to Bali next year. We've got the Bali Masters again in June next year, which is probably the biggest tournament in the world, which it could be. So yeah, it'd be good to see Pistol back here with his crew. Yeah,
wonderful. Obviously, there's over 35s, 45s, over 55s, so people of all ages, really over the age of 35 can get involved, which is wonderful to see.
Yeah, well, back in 2019, pre-COVID, we had about 50-odd teams come over for the Bali Masters. So it was a pretty big tournament, managing so many teams over 3 days. And probably the over 55 is the most entertaining age group to watch, watching those blokes run around with knee replacements or needing knee replacements and still be competitive. And that's awesome. Some of these guys are in their 60s and they're still having the kick of the footy and loving it and being competitive. So it's a great tournament. We just had our recent Masters again. Last month, we had about 18 teams come into Bali, which was good considering the restrictions on flights and vaccinations and things. We lost all three divisions. We lost the grand final in the 35s and the 45s and the 55s. So we'll be looking for a bit of revenge next year.
Absolutely. And how did you survive, obviously, the lockdown? Because we know about everyone around the world has been doing it tough, some more than others. And Bali, and like you mentioned before, it's great to see people coming over there again now and bringing that tourism back, because we know how much of a great place Bali is and how much they love Aussies. What was it like during that period, mate? How'd you keep yourself busy?
Yeah, well, economically, obviously, it's tough on a lot of people, locals and the expats who had businesses here in Bali. So, it was a tough time to make $1 and people found it really tough. We don't get the government handouts like we see in Australia with JobKeeper and government grants. So, a lot of people really struggled through that period, but actually living here and as a family here, we had a great time. I spent a lot of time with the kids and we had uncrowded surf and no traffic and totally different to, I guess, what we're used to here in Bali and just made the most of it. It was a really good 2 years and it's amazing how quickly it's recovered. We've seen a huge amount of people come in over the last couple of months, and I almost feel like I want to go back to that pandemic time again, because all of a sudden there's traffic out the front and getting from A to B gets tougher. The surf's getting more crowded. Everything's back to full price again. So, there was some good advantages of being in Bali during COVID. And I didn't leave Indonesia the whole time since March 2020. I've been in Indonesia the whole time, haven't returned home. I never did quarantine. So life here in Indo was pretty good. I did a few surf trips up to the Mentawais and over to Lombok and made the most of it. But, obviously making $1 was pretty tough, but it's great to see the tourism come back and everyone's starting to get back on their feet again.
And let's go, back 10 years plus. You finished playing footy for the Bombers. As I mentioned, 93 premiership player. We'll speak about your footy career afterwards. But what made you decide to move over to Bali? Because, obviously you'd been there as a holiday destination, but it's a big move to pack up your bags and decide to move overseas to a holiday destination like Bali.
Yeah, I guess I first came to Bali coming back from a football trip to South Africa. I was coming back through Perth and still had a bit of time off and decided to whip over to Bali. That was back in 1997. Fell in love with the place the first time I came here. The following year, we came here. The Essendon Footy Club came here in 98 for a footy trip. And ever since, I just had a fondness for Bali. I love the lifestyle. I love the surfing. And then I always thought about trying to live here. I guess when you holiday here for 2 weeks, it's a different experience of living here full time. And I wanted to try that out. So about 10 years ago or so, I sold my business. I was in sports marketing. And if you remember, I managed a lot of footballers back then. When I sold my business, I got put on a 1-year non-compete clause, which I couldn't work in the industry for 12 months. So I thought, here's a chance to go and try out Bali, see how I go. And I spent 3 months here and 3 months led into 6 months and into a year, and that was it. I never looked back, and ended up marrying a local Balinese girl, 2 kids, and set up business here. So that's how it all happened, really. I never had a set plan to move here for 10 years. It was probably more of a 3-month thing initially, and it just grew from there.
That's so cool. I'm very envious because I absolutely love Bali, and I was there a few years ago, and I just had a little one, so it's going to make life a little bit difficult to get over there, and at least for a little while. But no, I know how good a place it is, so I can see why you love it so much.
Yeah. Well, one thing when I came to Bali, I had no ambitions of playing football again. I thought my footy days were done. My body was shot. I had no real interest, and the club president Hinchy at the time heard I'd moved to Bali and hit me up on Facebook and said, "Can you come to training?" The club just about shot. We need a few numbers for training. So I went down to the Geckos a couple of times, and I didn't really get the bug straight away. I just wasn't. My heart wasn't in it. My body was pretty, had a bit busted up from my footy days. But then over time, I kept coming down to training, and I started to really enjoy it. And the club started to get a few numbers down there, and I just got the bug back. And I really worked hard to get my body back in order so I could play. And I realised how much I missed playing football and the banter and the camaraderie. And so I fell in love with the game again. And then, my whole social networks revolved around football here. And then it was really exciting to start introducing the game to, I guess, non-Australians or people who haven't grown up with our game. And that's some of the people out of Sydney or, some Indonesians. We've now got, players from all around the world as part of our footy club. So it was great to introduce footy to people who are foreign to it and to see them develop. And now we've got a really big community who play football. We've got a really strong women's team, a really strong men's team, and we've got a junior program which we call Indo Kick, not Oz Kick. We call it Indo Kick. And we've also got a program that goes out to the local community to introduce football to them as well.
How good is that? And who do you actually play against, Rick, for the AFL Geckos?
Well, it's a tough one because we're the only team in Bali. So the only games we get to play are either touring to other parts of Asia or teams coming to us. So during COVID, the only team we could play was Jakarta. So we had a few home and away games with them because we could still travel domestically at times. So, that's one of the biggest challenges of playing football in Asia is that we don't, train Tuesday, Thursday and rock up Saturday to play footy. We have to sometimes travel for 2 days to get to the ground and play one game of football. So, there's challenges in that and also funding to be able to do that. But it also creates such a great, trip to actually, travel so far, then to, put your best effort on for 2 hours on the footy field. So playing football in Asia, it's very unique and it's something I do love.
And the AFL Geckos, you've had some absolute legends. Tell us about some of them as well that have played or been involved in the last sort of 10, 15 years.
Well, that's one thing that's been exciting for a lot of our players is that we've seen so many legends of the game come through. We've had current players come and train with us even during the season. We've had Jordan De Goey come and train with us twice now during the season. We've had Dustin Martin come and do a pre-season session with us. And, so we've had some really big names come through. Then we get the likes of Wayne Carey and Dermot Brereton and Glenn Archer and some really big names come through and come down to training. So it's great for our players because they get to meet legends of the game, something that probably a lot of clubs don't get.
How good's that? And imagine that some of the young ones as well getting to rub shoulders with Dusty and Geordie and like you mentioned, even Wayne Carey and Dermy, some of the absolute past and present legends.
Yeah, well, I can name probably 50 more, I reckon. That I've probably missed a few big names in there. So, that's one exciting thing for us. We get to train with these guys. Sometimes we even get to play with them. We've had, Paul Williams come to Vietnam with us. We had Dane Swan come to Thailand and Batam with us. So, we've had some pretty good, pretty big AFL names tour with us. And then with the Masters, we always get a number of ex-AFL players playing for us, but also other teams as well, which is exciting for a lot of guys to play with and against ex-AFL people.
And are you sort of like a player coach or you're just purely focusing on the coaching at the moment?
No, I'm still playing. I'm still hanging in there. Turning 50 next birthday, and
wow,
I'm still playing.
You don't look a day over 30,
so
mate.
I'm just hanging in there. I'm pretty lucky because I didn't have many joint issues when I played AFL. I didn't do an ACL or something like that. So my main issues are soft tissue issues. Doing a hamstring or a calf. They're my main issues. But I still train every day. I own the F45 license here in Bali, and I train there most days and surf most days. So I'm trying to keep my body intact so I continue to play. And I want to keep playing as long as I can. That's what I really want to do. And I'm coaching the club, and sometimes when I'm playing, it's a bit hard to coach, but I'm trying to mix up the both. And yeah, I'm just loving it.
And you've also got in October one of the biggest overseas women's carnivals of all time. It's AFL Tennis-side, which is super exciting over there happening in Bali. Tell us more about that, Rick, and how people can get involved.
Yeah, well, just a step back. We launched our women's team, I think it was 2018, 2019. It's been amazing how many women have joined our team, and the demographic between the men and women is so different. Our women's squad has such a broad demographic of backgrounds. We've got Irish players and Canadians and Americans and touch rugby players from New Zealand. So we get a broader demographic join our women's team. Pre-COVID, we were planning to host a tournament here, and obviously that got scrapped because COVID hit. So in October this year, the 1st of October, we're going to launch our first women's tournament, which obviously the Bali Gecko women's team will be hosting. So we're just looking for teams to come over and join that. It's only a tennis-side on a smaller pitch, and we're just looking to get a tournament going with a handful of teams initially and make it an annual event, bit like our Bali Masters tournament in June with the men. We started with, I think, 3 teams 10 years ago, and now we've got 50 teams. So the plan this year is to get a handful of teams over to Bali to play in a tens tournament and then make that an annual event and grow it from there. And that's going to help, football in Bali, but also throughout Asia, especially with the women's football.
I hope you've got plenty of water and plenty of ice vests over there, mate, because it gets extremely hot during the day in Bali.
Yeah, it does. It does get warm. But the one thing about playing in Asia, it is pretty hot. But I find your body is more suited to play in the hot conditions than the cold conditions. If you asked me to go and run a lap in Melbourne in July, I don't reckon I could do it. But the warmer conditions do help the body in some way. And we do keep our games pretty short. Like in the Masters, the games are only 2 by 10-minute halves. So you get plenty of rest in between. But yeah, it's a great environment. We're actually developing a new ground here in Bali, which overlooks the ocean. It's great surface, and we're hoping one day to have our own full-size football ground, be able to host games and tournaments.
And what's it like living in Seminyak, one of obviously the best parts of Bali?
Well, it's getting busy, I tell you. Traffic's back and there's plenty of people around. So, the bintang singlets are out and the braided hair, that's all starting to come back pretty quickly. And some other areas have really boomed, like, Chungu's now crazy, out of control, busy. Bingon's getting that way up in the Bukit. So, yeah, it's an interesting place to live when you've got to try and live here and work here. And every night's a Saturday night in Bali. Every night I get a message from someone who wants to go and have a beer, sunset beer or go to a party. And in terms of lifestyle, you've got to be pretty disciplined because otherwise you could end up drinking every night of the week. I just got a message from David Grenvold, who I played in the Essendon Premiership with back in '93. He's just landed. He's, mate, what time are you up for a beer? And that happens almost every second day. Someone arrives and wants to have a beer. It is tough on the body sometimes.
Well, as you just mentioned, at 1993, let's go back there, Ricky, because obviously one of your proudest moments of your footy career, winning that 93 flag with what they call the Baby Bombers. Let's go back and reminisce about that, what that day was like, and winning the premiership against the odds. Yeah,
well, it was against the odds. We weren't thought about as being premiership contenders, probably up until middle of 1993. At that point in time, I was just happy to get a game. I wasn't thinking much about finals or playing in premierships. I was just happy to get a game each week. And then we got to the finals, and I think we finished on top. So I actually said to my dad as we entered the final series, if I win a premiership, can I get a tattoo? And he just thought, mate, you're getting ahead of yourself, son. You're miles away from winning an AFL premiership. Let's just focus on next week. But that's sort of the first time I thought, maybe we can win, win the flag. So yeah, obviously, the Adelaide Crows game, the prelim, we were down by 7 goals. I thought my chances of playing the grand final were pretty slim at that point. We got past them. And once we got past the Crows, we always thought they were probably the best team in it that year. Once we got past the Crows, I always felt like we could beat Carlton. And we went in with a lot of belief. And we played in front of big crowds all year, so we felt really well prepared. And I know we were termed the Baby Bombers, but we did have a really strong list of older players, experienced players. We had a few stars, obviously. We had some pretty big names in that team, but we had some really good, experienced soldiers as well. And then we had the flair of the younger guys like Hurd and McCurry and Masidi, these sort of guys, and Wanganeen, obviously. So, yeah, it was a good mix of players, and it was a dream come true, obviously, to win the flag that year.
And I know this is going to be a tough question. It's almost like asking who your favourite kid is, but who was the best that you played with at the Bombers?
Probably surprised a few people with my answer, but I think Mark Mercuri was the best player I ever played with. On his day, he was just unbeatable. You couldn't match up with him with in the air. You couldn't match up with him on the ground. And when he was on, and we probably didn't see the best of Mark for a long time because he did have a few injuries, but he was the best player I'd played alongside. And Michael Long's final series in '93 was just unbelievable. He was one of the ones that got us to that flag. And then we didn't see the best of Michael after that because he did his knee in the preseason of '94, which pretty much derailed our whole season after that. But Michael Long at that point was a Dustin Martin of the AFL at that point in time. And unfortunately, that knee injury, I think that we never saw the total best of Michael for a long period of time. But at that point in the final series, it was pretty amazing to be out there beside him to watch.
And who would have been your toughest opponent during your footy career, Rick?
Oh, it's a big question, and you're probably surprised to hear that. But I played on a bloke called Sean Simpson at Geelong, and he kept me to 4 possessions on a Friday night in front of a big crowd. Definitely a low light of my life. And now Sean and I have become friends because his sister lives here in Bali, and she's now business partners with my wife, and her husband is so Sean's brother-in-law is my best mate.
That's amazing.
Every time I see Sean, it just brings me back nightmares about that night at the MCG. It would have been around about 97, I think it was. I could not get near it. He just completely blanketed me out of the game. In terms of players that were really tricky to play on, like Main Waring, Matera, they were really, really tough opponents as well. Nathan Buckley I played a number of times. He was obviously always difficult. But, yeah, there's probably the best bloke I saw play. I would have to say Gary Ablett and Wayne Carey were the 2 players I thought as an opposition player were outstanding. And I remember that game where Gary Ablett kicked 14 goals in a losing team against us and Salmon kicked 10 down the other end. That was a pretty amazing game to be part of. And to watch Gary Ablett live, from close range, kick 14 goals in a losing team was something out of the ordinary.
Those are the glory days. Of course, we had Lockett and Modra as well. And, yeah, with kicking many bags of goals and got so many guys who kick over 100, now you don't even see blokes kick 70 or 80 in the season. So,
yeah, well, the game's changed a bit. Full forwards just can't stand the goal scorer anymore. They've got to, defensively transition and run down the ground. So the game has changed. But talking about I mentioned Crows before, and you just mentioned Modra. We used to call the Adelaide Crows the 4 M's. If you can keep the 4 M's down, then you'll win the game. Do you reckon you know who those 4 M's are?
Modra McGuinness, McDermott, and I can't remember the 4th.
Maynard.
Oh,
the other one.
Rocket Maynard.
Yeah, Maynard. So when we statistically look at the Crows, if those 4 fire, you can't beat them. So we called them the 4 M's.
The 4 M's. Oh, there you go. And what about great Sheeds? Because I've had him on Legends with Bevo before, and we know how much of a character he is with his waving the scarves, and the list goes on with the traditions that Sheeds brought up over the years. But what was he like as a coach, and did you cop some sprays from him, Rick?
Oh yeah, I guess I've copped sprays from most of my coaches over the period, but the best one I copped from Sheeds was after that 96 loss to Sydney in that prelim. I copped an almighty spray that night. He actually apologised to me at the 25-year premiership reunion. So he must have stewed on it for a long period of time and thought maybe I was a bit hard on Rick that night, but that was the biggest spray I ever copped. And the one interesting thing about Sheeds, he always came up with really abstract comparisons to things in life, historical things and whatever. So I remember going into that 93 final series, he used Duncan Armstrong as an example and Debbie Flintoff King, and he'd always somehow link up the game of football to something historical or some other athlete in the world. And he was really good in keeping things fresh and not hearing the same thing over and over again. During the week, Sheeds can go off on a bit of a tangent sometimes, with training or whatever else, but on match day, he was fantastic.
And obviously we know how good his record was as well and how much of a genius he was, but perhaps a couple of more ideas in terms of what outlandish things that Sheeds did when you were sort of under him as a coach.
Yeah, he did a few things that back in 93 or in that 90s era where you thought that's so weird, that's so abstract. But then you see it happening now in current day football, flooding and rotations and all those things we just accept now as being normal. When it was done back in the 90s, it was out of the ordinary. So he probably was always ahead of his time in the way he coached the team. And, he did have some weird and wonderful times with Sheeds. The one thing he used to do is he used to be talking about a player you'd be playing against, but he'd be talking about that player from a previous era. So, for example, he'd be talking about Scott West from the Bulldogs, who wore number 7, but he called him Doug Hawkins, who wore 7 a decade before. So when you're a player and you're in a coaches meeting and he's referring to players from a previous era, that really confused the players. I remember he used to call Ange Christo Alex Marcoux, for example. So that used to give the boys a bit of a giggle in team meetings when he was referring to players from previous eras. And I imagine what it would have been like when he coached GWS. I think those young blokes there would have half the time would know what he was talking about.
What a legend!
And he can never spell my name right. Every time he put my name up on the board on the whiteboard, he never got my name spelled correctly.
Well, he's got a pretty good record, so you can excuse him for that anyway, can't you? So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And what about in terms of some of the funny teammates, Rick? Obviously, back in footy these days, it's changed a lot because we see, you mentioned before about De Goey, and players can't seem to, fart or cough in public these days without cutting criticism for it. So, but back in the day when you played in the 90s, it would have been a lot different there, no doubt. So tell us about some of the funny characters that you played with at the club, and maybe a couple of pranks perhaps that you're involved in or you come across there.
Yeah, there's definitely, I guess, a lot more characters I felt around back then, but we did get away with a lot more. There wasn't cameras and social media, and so the pranks probably got a bit more outrageous back then what they do now. There was always guys like Mark Harvey and Dave Kelthorpe, these sort of guys who were always pushing the boundaries when it came to pranks, and some of them went a little bit wrong at times. It seems like today, with the social media and the amount of journalists that cover football and podcasts, and I guess players have to be a lot more stringent in what they do in terms of behaviour. Can I think of an example off the top of my head? Not if I think of something later, I'll bring it up. But yeah, I think players now are just are under so much more restrictions and under the eyes so much more. And Jordan De Goey recently, he spent some time in Bali, and I did say to Jordan, mate, while you're here, maybe not drive around with your helmet off, or maybe not go to a certain nightclub and just stay under the radar a little bit. But he obviously didn't listen to me. Go to Mexicola probably wasn't the greatest choice, but he wasn't the only footballer in the AFL on their bye weekend to go to a bar. So I don't think that was a major issue. I just think the way we view footballers now and what's appropriate and what's not has changed a lot over the last 20 or 30 years. So I can see why there was some backlash, and I felt a little bit sorry for Jordan. He was, he copped so much during those couple of weeks. But that's the difference that AFL players confront now compared to what we did, 80s and 90s, I guess.
Yeah, spot on. I guess because of what happened with America as well, with Jordan's situation, that probably didn't help either, did it? Because it was a bit of a bad look, like you mentioned.
He's always going to be under the spotlight. He's not a bloke it's easy to miss. He's a big guy, covered in tattoos, plays for Collingwood, high profile. He was always going to get spotted. So, in this day and age, he's going to be under the microscope, and it probably backfired him on a little bit. But it sounds like Collingwood have got around him, and hopefully, he finished off the year strongly. Looks like Collingwood might be up there about, so hopefully he finishes the year strongly, and who knows what club he's got at next year. Be interesting to see. Yeah,
most definitely. And you still watch a fair bit of your Bombers as well over there in Bali?
I watch a lot of footy, yeah. I've got the global app, so I watch a lot. I watch most games over the weekend. I watch a lot of the shows during the week, so I'm still a footy nut. I still like to keep track of what's happening in the footy world. I do the fantasy. We have the Geckos fantasy football comp, which I'm really crap at. I'm always on the ladder with that. I think I pick the players through my heart rather than through my mind. So I tend to pick players that I'm friendly with. So I'm often pretty ordinary at that game. So yeah, I watch a lot of football and really enjoy it. I'm probably more a Bulldog supporter. I grew up being a Bulldog. Doug Hawkins was my favourite player, and my dog was called Dougie Hawkins. So I've gone back to being more of a Bulldog supporter than a Bomber supporter, to be honest.
And you've sort of been back. I know you mentioned before you haven't been back since the pandemic, but plans to go back to Victoria and catch up with some friends and family in recent times, or?
Not while it's cold, mate. One of the reasons I moved to Bali because I hated cold weather. I hated surfing in cold water. So I don't have any, immediate plans to get back. Plus, Bali's starting to rebound, and I've got a lot of business interests here in Indonesia, not only Bali but also Jakarta. So I really do need to focus on rebuilding our businesses here. So I don't have any plans to head back to Australia, but I've got so many friends now turning 50. So all those invites are starting to come through now because I'm obviously turning 50. So all my schoolmates are hitting that age. So I've probably got to head back at some point, but I will do so reluctantly.
Or make them come to you, mate. That's probably an easier thing.
Well, that's what's happening. They're all coming here. Every day I'm getting messages saying I'm arriving, I'm coming tomorrow, I'm coming next month. So they're all on their way, I tell you. It's only going to get busier over here.
Well, you're obviously doing well with the F45 if you're having a few beers as well at the same time, mate, because you're in great shape for someone that's about 1050. So
yeah, you just got to mix it up, you know. Like I opened our first F45 on the Gold Coast a few years back with my brother, and then we decided to do Bali. We opened up our first one in around about 2017, I think it was. So I've got the F45 in Seminyak, the F45 in Canggu. I've got one in Jakarta, and also opening another one up in the Bukit up near Uluwatu. So it's probably at least it's a business that keeps me fit. So when I do have those beers at sunset, at least I can get up next morning and not feel so guilty and get back into F45.
Exactly right. You mentioned it before, there's been some absolute AFL legends that have come over to Bali. Before I let you go, a bit of fun with a segment called Starstruck Celebrities. So throughout your footy career, past or post-footy career, who's the celebrity that's left you starstruck the most, Ricky, and why?
That's a huge question. I actually went all the way to Barbados to meet Rihanna one time because I was good friends with Brian Lara, and he invited me over to a concert and he said I'd get to meet her, and I was always a massive fan of Rihanna. So I went all the way to Barbados and spent every day there trying to chase and meet Rihanna, and it didn't happen. Brian let me down. So that was the one that got away. In terms of here in Bali, see, AFL players don't really, I'm not starstruck by AFL players.
Yeah.
But it's a very good question. But yeah, I guess the person I wanted to meet most in the world was Rihanna at that time.
Oh, what a shame it didn't happen. So
didn't happen, mate. Yeah, that one snuck through. Yeah.
I reckon I actually bumped into her a few years ago. It just said g'day because we didn't obviously know each other then. But there was a Daryl Braithwaite concert a few years back in Bali, and I reckon you were there as well. And that was sensational.
Yeah, that was at Finns. Yeah, that was at Finns Club. They had all those Australian legends. Yeah, they had 1927 played that day. They were one of my favourite bands as well.
Yeah.
So we might have crossed paths that day on the dance floor.
Exactly right. So you obviously get quite a few Aussie legends, especially now that things are starting to get back to normal, coming over as well.
We always, particularly about October, you get so many of the AFL players and coming over. Not only the current players, but a lot of coaches and people involved with football at all levels. So October for me gets really crazy busy with current players and past players, and it's a very tough social calendar for me during October.
And the odd musicians as well.
And the odd musicians, yeah. You see a few little. Well, Jason Singh from Taxi Ride, he's trained with the Geckos before.
Oh, how good!
So you remember Taxi Ride and Get Set Everybody, that song? He's trained with the Geckos in the past, and he reckons he's coming over later this year to have a run. So yeah, we get a few sneaky sound systems here at the moment. Remember Connie with the big hair from Sneaky Sound System? She's over here at the moment playing in Mississippi. So you get a few Australian musicians and so forth coming through.
Sensational. And just one final question. You were a boundary writer for Channel 7 back in the day. What was it like to work with Dipper?
Well, I actually didn't get to meet with Dipper. I probably spoke like him at times and got my words messed up. I worked with Dennis Cometti and Bruce McAvaney and Tim Watson, who was one of the most funniest blokes I ever played football with. So that was a good experience. I enjoyed working with Seven. The only thing I just hated those Sunday afternoons on the cold MCG watching crappy game like Melbourne versus Fremantle back then. So there was times it got a bit tough, and I was happy to move on and watch other boundary riders come through.
Fair enough. Well, looks like you're living a pretty damn good life over there in Bali, anyway, mate.
Yeah, I won't be swapping lies. If Channel 7 come back and offer me the job, I'd be definitely saying no.
And once again, just plug the upcoming tournament that's happening over there in October.
Okay, so we've got the AFL Women's Tens tournament hosted by the Bali Geckos women's team. We've already got Jakarta Bintangs locked in. They're coming over, and we've got a couple other teams from Australia putting their hand up. So if you're keen to come and play a women's tournament in Bali and you only need a squad of 12 girls, just send the Bali Geckos a message on their Instagram at Bali Geckos, or you can hit us up through our Facebook page as well.
Wonderful, Rick. What a pleasure having you on Sports Legends with Bevo, mate. Thanks for taking the time, and obviously you're enjoying life so much over there in Bali, so keep up the great work, and hopefully I can get over to Bali and have a beer with you some stage rather than the next couple of years.
Yeah, mate, let me know when you're coming over. Yeah, we might have a little sunset beer when you're here, and maybe visit my spas. I've got some massage spas too, mate, so if you want to relax and feel good, I've got a couple of massage spas you might want to venture into as well.
Sounds like a plan. Good on you, Rick. Thanks for chatting to us, mate.
No worries, mate. Good on you.
Cheers.